Welcome back on NGO Monitor podcast. Today, an amazing guest with me, Rawan Osman. I love how you define yourself, a recovering anti-Semite.
Recovered already.
Recovered anti-Semite. I think a unique opportunity to actually dive into the psychic of the Arab world and the Arab communities around the world in understanding one of the biggest pains of today, which is anti-Semitism. Thank you so much for joining us this morning and for talking to me.
Olga, first of all, thank you for inviting me, especially, and that is something you know, it goes without saying. What you're doing, your work in NGO Monitor is phenomenal and it's much needed. So I'm happy to be able to contribute this droplet to your efforts.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate that. So let us dive into the conversation. We have so many topics we would like to cover today. Share, obviously, with us a little bit of your personal story so that our viewers do get some background. But I would like you to actually focus on how your personal story shaped your understanding of anti-Semitism and the deeply rooted Jew hatred in the Arab world, the price that it is attached to it, and what that has taught you in how we might fight this, hoping that there might be less of this moving forward.
So after October 7th, I became a public speaker, and I always identify as a recovered anti-Semite because then I get the attention of the room, and I tell, especially Jews, I promise you, if you were in my shoes, you would hate the Jews as well. I use my personal story to explain, especially to youngsters in Jewish communities, why the Arab world hates them. And I'm lucky I have this understanding, not because I read about it in academic books, but because I myself was an anti-Semite who hated the Jews, the Israelis, and the Zionists, and I always mention the three terms because they are used interchangeably in the Arab world. It's a farce that we make a distinction between Zionists and Jews. Otherwise, why did more than 850,000 Jews leave the Arab world?
So you're saying that in the Arab vocabulary, in your upbringing in schools, there was actually no distinction between a Jew and a Zionist?
Never. If you hate somebody so much, children argue, they would tell them you're a liar like a Jew. Or if you talk about your a friend you don't like, he's so cheap like the Jews. He's so cheap like a rabbi. No, it's the Jew has become equivalent to an insult. You see this today in the West when you say Zionist. You're describing scum of the earth. So I was born in Damascus. My father is Sunni from the capital Syria. My mom is Shia from the Bekaa Valley. The sheer fact that they intermarried tells you that they were secular and that religion was irrelevant in my upbringing, especially that they sent us to a French Catholic school. So I grew up in a secular society in Lebanon for the first 18 years, where everybody was tolerant, especially in the aftermath of the Lebanese civil war, which claimed more than 150,000 lives, and it was caused by the Palestinian cause. But this is not our topic today. This tolerant society made a social pact to move on, to shove it all under the carpet. The only thing they still hated, everybody agreed on, is this animosity towards Israel, and the very word is never used. We refer to Israel by the southern neighbors, the Zionist entity, the occupiers, etc. I grew up an anti-Semite, and I was one of Hezbollah's biggest fans. Why? Because Israel occupied South Lebanon, and Hezbollah were the only heroes who dared defy the occupation. We did not know when we were exposed to all this reality that for more than a decade, Yasser Arafat and his gangsters, often joined by the radical left from Germany or Italy or even Japan, trained and occasionally sent men and women to infiltrate Israeli borders by land, by sea, and attack Israeli civilians. So this was the strategy to intimidate the Israelis. This is what we refer to by saying terrorism. We call that terrorism. They want to terrify the Jews into leaving the land. So after Hezbollah's operations expanded into Europe and South America, and after more than a decade of restraint, Israel decided to create a buffer zone in South Lebanon. I didn't know all this. So I hated Israel and the Jews for many reasons, because this hatred is embedded in our education in the school, because we were told a consistent story about Israel by people who are famous and intelligent. You see them on TV, they write in newspapers, they're politicians, they're writers, they're revered, whether on the right side or the left side of the political spectrum. Everybody told a consistent story. Plus, there were no Jews living among us to contest whatever the state told us about them. So it was more than natural for me to hate them. And we lived through many wars between Israel and Lebanon. Context matters, but we were given context by people who loathed Israel. So I remember in 1996, there was an incident in Qana, and I believe Al Jazeera reported back then, and we were not used to gore. Graphic scenes were not as normalized as they are nowadays. So it was shocking to see women and children dead. And the report said the Israeli Air Force knew that this UN shelter was housing hundreds of women and children, and they deliberately targeted. So you internalize,
much like they do now
today,
with what's going on in Gaza.
You internalize that it is in their nature to do that. You wouldn't question it. The only difference between back then and now is that now we have internet, we have social media. So back then, the Israeli narrative was completely omitted from our existence. Mm-hmm. Today, you have access to the story of the Israelis. I need to add something, especially that I'm talking here in NGO Monitor, legal detail that many Israelis do not know. When I do public speaking, I see in the crowds people are so confused. Really? The Arabs waged a war against the Jews in 1948. They lost the war. Okay, Israel is a reality. They wanted to contain the situation. So they resorted to different methods since the 1950s. Many Arab countries embedded in their constitutions and basic laws anti-normalization laws and policies forbidding people-to-people contact between their citizens and Israelis, even if you meet them abroad, which means as a Lebanese, a Kuwaiti, an Algerian, an Iraqi, you meet an Israeli abroad.
It's against the law.
You can't speak to them. So even if you were curious enough to ask, why do you treat the Palestinians this way? You knew the consequences if you get caught. You're not supposed to talk to them. That contributed, Olga, for many decades to dehumanizing the Israelis and the Jews. This is why I had a better understanding on October 7th. And I knew that many Arabs, although they deny it, knew that Hamas targeted children and women and elderly, but they couldn't sympathize with them because they were systematically demonized.
Wow.
If you want me to talk about the price, because from your perspective as an Israeli who travels around the world, you know that we are not allowed to speak to the Israelis. So today I sit with you in Jerusalem, and this is my 17th visit to Israel since October 7th, and many Arabs are confused. I must be working for the Mossad. How do you go to Israel? Well, I go because I have a German passport and because I have a squeaky clean criminal record, and I come with good intentions. And I understand reality. I see with my own eyes how Israel functions.
So what happened? How did you become a recovered anti-Semite? What enlightened you?
I moved to Europe and I landed in France because I spoke French. I lived in the Jewish quarter in Strasbourg, and I realized that the Jews are normal. They don't bite. They don't have horns. Not that everybody in the Arab world believes that. Maybe in rural areas, uneducated communities do believe that the Jews have horns and tails. But in my case, I thought they are hateful. And I've seen well-behaved children, elderly, looked after. Families were sweet. They greeted me nicely. Even after I had a panic attack when I realized, oh my God, I live among Jews. The storekeeper with this happened.
You were physically frightened at first. when you understood that you were amongst Jews?
I'm not the fearful type, right? You know me now. And yet I had my first and last panic attack when I realized that I'm in a kosher store and those were Jews. So I went shopping and I did not know why I found the same ingredients and spices I needed. I've never been to a kosher store. And then when I heard people speaking not French, Hebrew, and turned and saw 4 religious men. Why do I say 4 religious men? Because they had payas and they were dressed in black and white. And I realized they were Jewish. I left not only my shopping, but also my bag with my passport, with my money. And I stormed out of the shop. I crossed without looking left and right, went up to the 3rd floor, to my bedroom, locked the door, and I was looking at the mirror, and I saw how sweaty and red I was, and I couldn't breathe. I didn't know it was a panic attack, like I was just trying to breathe. And looking at my face, I felt embarrassed. I felt like a fool. What happened? Why? And it was stupid because I left my stuff, so I had to go back. So I decided to compose myself. I went back, the man had left, the storekeeper was there. I pretended nothing happened, continued shopping, went to pay. He asked me, where are you from? And I told him from the Middle East. He insisted from where? Half Lebanese, half Syrian. And from his smile, I knew that he understood what happened. But he allowed me to save face. And I always share this detail. I tell everyone, on that afternoon, that gentleman converted me from an enemy to an ally through kindness, a simple act of kindness. Because he was more understanding, he knew where this is coming from. I didn't. It took me weeks of reflection. Why on earth did my body react this way? They didn't even look at me, Olga. And I concluded that for the first time in my life, I was sharing the same space with the Jew, the enemy. And I asked myself in my mid-20s, why is the Jew the enemy? I've never spoken to Jews. Because everything I knew about the Jews in Israel, I learned from the former Secretary General of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah. He told us, often quoting Haaretz, everything we needed to know about the Jews and about Israel. So it made sense for me to start with Hezbollah. And I was shocked when I watched a video of Hassan Nasrallah back in the 80s in black and white on YouTube, where he said, we in Hezbollah do not acknowledge political borders and we would like Lebanon to become an extension of the Islamic Republic of Iran. So I was shocked. I'm like, I did not subscribe to this agenda. Do people know? I was so naive, Olga. Of course people knew. Hezbollah published their manifesto in Lebanese newspapers in the 80s. Everybody knew. But you know, the attitude of, they don't really mean it.
Just like Hamas has its manifesto published for decades, and people continue in the West to say they don't really mean it.
The Western left keeps telling us, West-splaining, what do we call it? West-plaining. To us, who come from the Middle East, who keep sounding the alarm. They say, they don't really mean it. Did you read the update in 2017? And then you have to tell them, that was a farce designed for Western ears. That happened after they were designated a terror organization. Or when Western countries were contemplating designating them as a terror organization, they adapted to your ears. That did not negate their original manifesto or charter. So I was lucky because my eyes were open, because I realized the simple truth. When I relearned the history of our region, I was disappointed, and that was a long battle against my ego. Why? Because I realized it is our side. We were the aggressors. We were the assailants.
It's not an easy realization to have.
To look at them, to look at your friends and family, to look at those people you revered, famous celebrities, academics, professors, leaders, thought leaders in the Arab world, and to realize that they are wicked, they're liars, they're hypocrites. And what led to this dilemma between the Arab world and Israel was the entitlement attitude among Arab and Muslim leaders already back in the 20s, where they categorically rejected Jewish self-determination.
So how did your friends and family react to this de-radicalization, or as you say, a recovery from anti-Semitism that you were basically born into?
You speak German. I don't know if I relearned or like it was a process of verlernen. I had to replace everything I knew with reality, with truth, and I had to do my homework, and it took me years.
Speaking of German, it's literally the Weltanschauung, because it's not just learning something, it's actually the paradigm that you put on top of
my
the facts that you
worldview
might learn.
Shifted completely, and people think it happened because of that incident in Strasbourg. That was a triggering moment, that was an epiphany. But it took me many, many, many years for my worldview to shift entirely. And of course, my friends and family members were disappointed. Let's say that in 2018 and 2019, I decided to do something. I understood that we could, even as individuals, work towards an alternative vision in the miserable Middle East. When people think of the Middle East today, they think we are barbarians, we're disgusting, war, melodrama. The wheel, Olga, was literally invented in this miserable Middle East. So our civilization, ancient civilizations in plural, predated Islam. And today we are associated with one of the most extreme ideologies on this planet. It's not necessary. And there are moderate Muslims, and we have an example in the UAE, and we have to capitalize on that. And then we woke up one day to read the historical event occurring, the signing of the Abraham Accords, indeed offering us an alternative vision. So I was involved with American and Israeli organizations. And they thought that the antidote for anti-Semitism was Holocaust education. I personally thought they lacked the sense of urgency. It is not enough. When you sign something like the Abraham Accords, so you are building a coalition, an alliance, an alternative axis that will compete with the agenda of the so-called axis of resistance, they will, without a doubt, try everything possible to jeopardize your efforts, your alternative vision, and to obliterate every single bridge we are trying to build. But people lacked the sense of urgency, and they thought it's enough to take delegations to Auschwitz. No, it's not enough. You don't only want them to pity the poor Jew and then accept the poor Jew in the Middle East. That Jew is no longer poor, no longer asking for permission. Israel is there to stay. We need to develop an understanding. We need to have the hard conversations. So that was already problematic for my friends and my family. On October 7th, I realized that no, I'm not melodramatic, as many tend to say. I'm feisty because I'm a survivor. Unless you are a survivor, you do not survive the Middle East. And I understood that even I lacked the true understanding of what was happening in the Middle East. I always said, if the Arabs could, they would eat the Jews alive. It's such a horrific statement. Of course, not all Arabs want to kill the Jews, but anti-Semitism is rampant in the Arab world. And even in academia, I'll give you a concrete example because people would jump at my throat and say, what do you mean? Don't generalize. Literally after October 7th, on October 8th, I had to go to Berlin, and we had a one-week conference on anti-Semitism. After October 7th happened, on Friday, 1 week later, sitting in this room with the world's best experts on anti-Semitism, on Friday morning I asked, excuse me, Professor, when were you planning on talking about anti-Semitism in the Arab world? And she said, well, we don't have data to work with. We don't have data because the Arab and Muslim worlds do not acknowledge the problem. They insist that the problem is with Israel, not with the Jews. That those 850,000 Jews left voluntarily. No, they were uprooted, leaving assets, properties, the cemeteries of their family members behind, and they moved on. But at least we have to do them the honor to at least acknowledge, admit that we do have a problem with the Jews, that we know close to nothing about Judaism.
So it's actually a perfect point in which I want you to segue into the next sort of question, but we're staying within the same theme. Today, there is the deeply rooted religious motivated, right, and politically motivated anti-Semitism, Jew hatred in the Arab world. But it is met by complete abduction, hijacking, and vilification of human rights by a lot of the progressive circles in the West, that a lot of them converge with academic circles and what we would call intelligentsia, which dictate the discourse and the overall atmosphere. Understanding both now, because you live in the West, but you come from the Arab world, which predates which? Meaning, what are we really fighting? Are we fighting an Arab-infused, right, anti-Semitism that is being welcomed and then politicized in the Western language, which is the human rights language? Or is it the other way around, which is the politicization of human rights in the West, which is piggyback riding on some of the narratives that are being so, you know, nicely used for political purposes in the Arab world? Where should we focus on?
So it's interesting you said what predates what. So in Europe, we remember what happened to the Jews around the Second World War. And around the same period, a Jewish state was founded in the Middle East. Not as a consequence. Many think it was a consequence, so give them a country in Bavaria. You, the Germans, are guilty for that. No, it's not a consequence. It was a strategy developed over decades before 1948 by the fathers of Zionism, early Zionism, but it happened simultaneously. So the West is guilty of hating, of letting down, of failing the Jews. Many normalized Jew hatred and turned the blind eye when they were being slaughtered, and the result was 1/3 of the world's Jewry was exterminated. Those Jews who survived, and other Jews from the Arab world, for example, came to this corner, to Israel. The Nazis were defeated in Europe, and now the consensus became in the West, no. After the Americans revealed the secrets, the atrocities that took place, no. Civilized people should not accept that. So the discourse became, that was really bad, the Nazis were horrible, and now we owe the Jews an apology. And then they were promised never again. Simultaneously, people forget that many senior officers, Nazi senior officers, escaped and were offered haven in the Arab world. Alois Bruna died of old age in Damascus. Many senior officers helped establish intelligence apparati in the Arab world, in Libya, in Egypt, in Syria, etc. So why am I telling you this? Because I believe that although the Nazis were defeated in Germany, they passed the baton on to the Arab world. The Arab world that was already filled with hatred against the the Zionists, due to intensive propaganda that started with the Grand Mufti Haj Amin al-Husseini before he met Adolf Hitler. He developed a vision before he met Adolf Hitler. The rumors of the Zionists will eventually destroy Al-Aqsa started with him. He rejected the Jewish presence in the region. He realized that if this is a political conflict, it will eventually be resolved. So we need to turn it into a holy conflict, into a religious one. Otherwise, why would he strategically decide to restore the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque, which were neglected under Ottoman rule? Anybody who's listening to this interview can go and look at the photos from the archive online. He sent emissaries around the globe to collect donations to restore the site, because he understood you have to revive a connection between the Islamic Ummah and this particular corner. Otherwise, we are doomed. The Jews will establish a country, self-determination. Now, he had political ambitions. He was very smart, not to praise him. But something started back then, and then it was fused with Christian anti-Semitism in Europe. And this freak is what kept growing since 30s, 40s, 50s, it was festering around the world. The entirety of the Arab world rejected Israel. And then slowly there was called peace between Jordan and Israel, then Egypt and Israel. But even after the signing of the Abraham Accords, there is still a vast Arab and Muslim world that rejects Israel's existence. They want them wiped out. In the names of human rights, they solved this case into the West. And remember that many are still anti-Semites in the West. It's just frowned upon. It can have legal consequences, especially in countries like Germany. So it is much better to say, I have no problem with the Jews per se, but the way they're treating the Palestinians, I kid you not, a German friend who's a wonderful mother, and she used to run a school. She's a wonderful human being. She told me in 2021, where there were skirmishes in Israel, she said, when I see, she's German, when I see how the Israelis are treating the Palestinians, I understand why Hitler did to them what he did. I have goosebumps every time I say this. There are so many people who believe conspiracy theories, who hate Jews, who believe Jews killed their God, like a Catholic dimension of hatred. They didn't get the memo of the Vatican, when the Vatican, even the Pope, absolved the Jews from that original sin. So there are different motivations.
So basically, Rowan, what you're telling us is that in the Arab world, there's absolutely no difference between Jew hatred and anti-Zionism. And we spent decades discussing in academia and in general, where is the line between legitimate criticism of Israel and anti-Semitism. We have been countering attacks that Jews and Israel parade the anti-Semitism card too often just to disguise the political discussion over Israeli breaches of international law and so on and so on. But we are wasting our time because actually the two are synonymous. But I want to take that now notion to 2001 and the Durban conference, right? Which is the event that inspired the creation of NGO Monitor, because this is where the BDS manifesto was basically written, the systematic and institutional manipulation and weaponization of human rights, with NGOs, human rights and humanitarian NGOs being the main vehicle. How much of the BDS is really a thing in an Arab world? Is it just Western language, right? It is cushioned in a language that the Western world can understand, or is it also a thing in the Arab world? Are we fighting the same battle in the West and in the Arab world in this sense? Because BDS, as born in the human rights, comes with a whole new set of tools and methods in. By the way, I don't use the term BDS anymore. I think that especially after October the 7th, we need to look at the reality for what it is and call it for what it is. A full-blown political warfare against the Jewish people and our right for self-determination.
It absolutely is. And no, you don't have BDS in the Arab world because the Arab world already has no connections, none whatsoever, with Israel, with the exception of Egypt and Jordan, although it's a cold peace, but there's some form of collaboration on certain levels that are vital for those countries with Israel. And then you have trade, you have the Emirati airline coming to Israel after October 7th, which was not disrupted. You have research programs, Morocco, you can fly, you could fly. You've seen hundreds of thousands of Israelis going to visit the UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco. This was very, very, very unusual because the agreement among Arab and most Muslim countries is not to even acknowledge Israel's existence. So you are familiar, and those who are listening to us are familiar with scenes of athletes who refuse to compete against Israelis. We will not acknowledge you exist, even. So of course there is no economic collaboration, no diplomatic ties, no exchange programs between universities, no research programs where Arabs and Israelis come together.
And we see the same thing happening in transnational and different institutions from UN and everywhere. Exactly, these two converge, right? And are given a political manifestation in declarations and the bias at the UN, because it is a lot of the Western anti-Israel sentiment coupled with Arab world inspired old school anti-Semitism just being given a political expression, right?
Which makes it legitimate because it is not against the Jews. We are no longer rounding the Jews up and sending them to their death. We're criticizing Israel. We always want to preface our pro-Israel statements by saying, but you are allowed to criticize Israel. However, if you go that far, that is where we have a problem.
It's almost like saying, look, I have a Jewish friend, right?
Yes,
But
I have that Jewish friend. Yesterday night, there's a journalist who gave an excellent example. She's saying we are trying to explain that we do not abuse our girlfriend. And we forget that we don't even have a girlfriend. There is no girlfriend. She's not abused. Stop saying I'm not abusing my girlfriend. I don't have a girlfriend. You can criticize any country around the globe. If you're going to criticize Israel, you have to criticize the Palestinian Authority. You have to call a spade a spade. You have to call Hamas a terror organization.
so it's a grim picture, right, of what the challenges are. We understand that basically we're fighting one fight. Jew hatred is Jew hatred is Jew hatred, no matter how you call it, throughout history, including the 20th and the 21st century. What can be done? We are now at the verge of a new era, seemingly. The day after in Gaza, all these countries that are coming forth to be partners, and a historical opportunity that for the first time we have Arab states that are willing to vouch and be part of partners in this journey. What should we do to do this differently, to paint or try a different scenario historically?
It might come across as if it is all doom and gloom. Yes, we are dramatically outnumbered. Yes, we belong in the pro-Israel camp, and the vast majority of humanity hates us. Those who are interested in the topic think we are fools. However, I'm very optimistic, and I know that Israel will prevail. We are doing the right thing. The solution is consistency, moral clarity, and consistency. I'm not saying this to you, Olga, but many Jews must be reminded, or many friends of Israel must be reminded, you need consistency and clarity, because our enemies always try to gaslight us. They always try to find a way to discredit our position. No. Moral clarity. We know what we've seen on October 7th. We've been talking about it for very long. We're telling you this is going to happen. When in Sydney, the protesters chant, "Gas the Jews," we were saying this is a recipe for catastrophe. The writing is on the wall. Wake up, people. We are heading towards a reality where Israel will become Noah's Ark for the Jews. And the Jews have to understand and accept that because of this bizarre mariage d'affaires between Islamists and the radical left and antisemites, etc., people who want to bring the system down from within in the West are working to push this anti-Israel agenda. You have to contemplate Israel, living in Israel, investing in this country, because this country is not perfect, but it has potential. And we need to keep pushing. No matter how stormy it gets around us, we know who our enemies are, we know why, we know what Judaism is about, what the Jewish mission is about. We know why, out of all places on this planet, the Jews chose this particular part of the land. We know that the Islamists' claim to the land does not stand. No, it is not a country that should be exclusively for the Arabs. It's a tiny speck of land that is supposed to be the only Jewish country on this globe. And we have to fight for that and expose the lies consistently. Do not bang your head against the wall. Someone who wishes death upon you and your children is rotten, is corrupt. But keep putting it there, out there in the universe. We are so lucky we have social media. Yes, anti-Semitism spreads like fire in the wild, but we also have the opportunity, the chance to give ourselves a free platform where we voice our concerns, our reality, although many of our enemies would like our stories to be omitted from their existence. This is no longer possible in the age of technology and internet.
Rowan, you know that this is exactly what we do at NGO Monitor. Our mission is to defend Israel's right to exist as a Jewish homeland within the human rights space. But I want to thank you for everything that you are doing. You are such a formidable and brave person for stepping outside of your comfort zone and the background from which you come, but also for your curiosity to keep learning and actually exposing the truth through facts, historical and figures, which is also a value that we hold so dearly at NGO Monitor, talking about exposing and telling your truth. So I want to thank you for joining us today, but also for everything that you do. We are lucky to have you, and I want to say that the Arab world is lucky to have a voice like you, hoping that more of this will come in a brighter future for all of us. At the end of the day, we all live and share the same piece of the land, and I want to finish on a more positive note that there will be more countries joining the Arab Accords, Abraham Accords, and more normalization between the people.
I'm positive, I'm optimistic, and I'm grateful for NGO Monitor's efforts. Again, it's much needed and we need more of that. And I'm also grateful for your friendship, Olga. Thank you.
Thank you so much, dear Rowan.